That applause, by the way, is for the garland makers, not for me. Hare Kṛṣṇa. Welcome, everyone, to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. If it's your first time here, we welcome you. As it says on the sign, everyone welcome. And the International Side for Krishna Consciousness is an organization founded on the principles of the teachings of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Vaishnavism is monotheistic worship of God as the origin of everything. And in our line of teachers that come down from antiquity, or even before that, there's a mood and message that's passed on. The mood is that the main way to be connected to the Supreme is through devotion. And the method is called bhakti yoga, or adjustment of lifestyle, so that one uses whatever one has now without renouncing the world. It's a different kind of renunciation, not militant renunciation by neglecting the senses, but rather seeing that everything comes from a divine source, and that that source is personal and intentional and benevolent, and that we have a relationship with that personal source. And the lifestyle of bhakti yoga is meant to give us the wherewithal to stay in contact with that supreme person constantly, not at intervals, but all the time. That's how it's designed. And important in the mood of the practice of this kind of bhakti yoga is the purification of one's intention. And the intention is to serve selflessly. And that when we do serve selflessly, we feel satisfied. In fact, this is the gold standard, which is given in one of the most important of the teachings of the followers of Bhakti Yoga, called the Srimad Bhagavatam, in which in Sanskrit, these moods of bhakti are described as ahaituki apratiyata, which means that one isn't performing worship, and worship can be a word that brings up ideas of fanaticism, perhaps. But this philosophy is not based on fanaticism. It also is counterbalanced with philosophical understanding and logic. Worship actually is a word that comes from the word worth. If you look at the etymological dictionary, when you put ship on the end of something, of a word, not of something, of a word, then it becomes a noun. And worthship over time became worship. It means, in a generic way, where you think you're getting your highest value in life, where are you investing your heart? And that's another word in Sanskrit, which is somewhat similar, and that's called dṛḍha. Shrad means the heart. What does shrad mean? Just giving a little quiz. And da means, as in dadami, to bestow, to give something. So shraddha, da is an active verb. It means where you place something. So shraddha means, what are you putting your heart into? It's a similar idea of worship. What you think is of most value to you is, and I hate to break this, but where you put your energy. Sometimes people say, I don't have time to chant Hare Kṛṣṇa. It's like, it's not time. It's what you consider most important, because everyone, down to the ants, arrange their time. Of course, ants aren't really as conscious in arranging time, in ways that they think will benefit them the most. And this is one of the main points of getting educated in what's most advantageous for us. In fact, the ancient wisdom literatures, very specifically a book called the Sri Upanishad says, Anyadeva horsambhavad, anyada horasambhavat. It's so simple, but it's so practical and helpful. We all have to make decisions on what we do with our time, how we invest our attention, where we place our attention. And this ancient book says, Anyadeva horsambhavad, anyada horasambhavat. That there definitely will be a consequence for that decision. Not to pressurize anyone, but it says if you give your attention towards the Supreme, then the result will be extremely favorable. And if you cast your glance elsewhere, if you deviate your mind to inferior topics, then there are also consequences. That's another word that's helpful when dissected. Sequence. Sequence means there's a series, and it follows. One thing follows another. So the two words, ahaitukiya pratiyata, appear during a dialogue that took place 5,000 years ago in Naimisaranya. It's a forest which, according to those who study the structure of the universe, say is the exact center of our universe. And it has a spiritual significance. It's used by high thinkers, sages especially, for seminars. So there was a seminar that was held 5,000 years ago at Naimisaranya. Incidentally, the word Naimisaranya means the place where nobody blinks. Ostensibly because they're so interested in the subject matter, they don't close their eyes. They stay fully alert. And there, a teacher that was recognized by the assembly of sages, and according to the iPhone photographs we've seen of that event, actually there's paintings and descriptions, there were quite a few sages there, and they all elected, not by vote, but by consensus, Sutta Goswami, who was qualified by using his life to practice and study the science of bhakti yoga. And he gave some preliminary remarks that are memorialized in the Srimad Bhagavatam, especially the second chapter of the book. And he describes what the gold standard is for spiritual practice, so that one may avoid being sectarian, that is, rooting for the home team just for the sake of being the home team. One should, says Sutta, and of course Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, be more intelligent than that and understand why one is giving one's heart somewhere, or one's attention for that matter, by studying what is our nature and what is best for us. So in his teaching, Sutta Goswami says, Savai pumsam parodharmo yato bhaktiradhoksaje ahaitukiya pratiyata yayatma suprasidati. This is an answer to a question that the sages have asked him. They asked him 7 questions, and one of the questions was how to do the greatest good for all living beings. And what is the perfection of human life? And so this is an answer. Pumsam means people, so savai pumsam. Parodharmo means that the way that you can help yourself the most is performing bhakti yoga or devotional activities for the benefit of the Supreme. In other words, service for service sake. You're serving the Supreme, and it's constant. You don't have any distractions. It continues, even as one's life continues. You may have to perform work and all all do to one degree or another. You may have to sleep, you may have to, well, I won't add to the list, you get the idea. And one should be able to go on practicing at that time. And then, as I mentioned before, the mood should be that you're not asking for anything in return, you're giving service. And not saying that because I gave, how much am I going to get back? Which is prospect. In fact, one of the great teachers of this system of Bhakti Yoga mentions that, and I brought it up earlier, that intention is extremely important. And he said that there are 4 levels of motivation or intention for doing any kind of work or action or service. One is fear. We may do something because we're afraid to either not do it because of the consequences or because of duress. In fact, come to think of it, when somebody does something under duress, it's often not counted as valid. Because, for instance, if you sign a contract and someone was holding a bow and arrow in front of you and saying, if you don't sign it, then I'll let the arrow go and it might hit you, then that's not counted as you signing the contract because it was under duress, you were afraid. But that's one of the most common motivations, says the sages, when they talk about the way people move in this world. It's out of a sense of fear. Trying to avoid suffering is one of the kinds of fear. It's called payam. And then the next above that, as far as motivation goes, is prospect. And that is, what do I get in return for what I'm about to do? And I don't know about you, but if I ever do a Google search, which I may not do much anymore since I got ChatGPT, I notice that the first 5 or 10, depending on how popular the subject of the product is, have a little sign above each one of the postings that say sponsored. And what does sponsored mean? It means if I click here, I owe you something for your answer. And it might also be skewed. Your answer might be skewed because you're doing this for a prospect. You want something out of it. Thanks for warning us anyway. I keep scrolling down. I don't know if it's as highly effective, but it seems to be psychologically satisfying to me to scroll down so I get to one of them that doesn't say sponsored. But this idea of prospect, you may find that you go to an establishment and they have fine service for you, but try not paying and see how they treat you. Probably you'll be arrested because their service only goes so far. As long as you give something in return, that's fine. Otherwise, that's not in their wheelhouse. The next is called duty, and even when I say duty, we can think of many examples. For instance, every United Airline flight I get on, active military are asked to get on first, and there's a phrase that people say, thank you for your service. Because there is a sense, maybe it's not fully out of duty that people in a professional military serve. There could be other reasons, but nonetheless it's edging in that direction, that somebody might sacrifice their life for a higher cause. That's getting close to duty. But to speak of pure duty, if somebody does something out of duty, for instance, tells the truth when they don't have to, when they would have got financial gain for that, a poor person gets in his cup a diamond ring that somebody accidentally put in there and then goes and gives it back. What kind of shockwave does that send through the universe? that sense of dutifulness that wasn't meant for me. She made a mistake. She put it in my cup. Duty is a very high idea, but there's something even higher, and that's love. And that can be completely selfless. One of the emblems of that kind of love is a mother for a child. What real benefit does a mother get 9 months in the gestation period and the birth, which can be extremely painful, and then there's 24 hours a day attendance to a little creature that doesn't really have a sense of anything else except him or herself. In fact, if the mother gets on the phone, the child begins to get louder because it realizes that her attention is going slightly elsewhere, or maybe even covers the mother's mouth while she's trying to talk to others because I'm here. And that can go on not just 16 years, but 34 or 50. I've seen in my family, of course, my parents are both gone, but I did notice that there's that sense, like, it's all right, just dump it on the parents because they can handle all types of worries. What is that? There's a sense of love, although that also has some mixture of other emotions and motivations in it, perhaps. But what the sages talked about was the pure love that we have as souls for the Supreme Soul. And in that, they say, when it's expressed and when there's no interruption to it, satisfies the heart. Savaipum samparo dharmo yato bhaktirat hoksaje. Haitu kia pratiyata yayatma suprasidati means at that point you'll feel satisfied. Krishna consciousness is at once philosophical and very practical because there are consequences. That's a science. We can study physical objects and see that they have properties. There are ways in which they react to different stimuli. And on a subtle level, there's also consequences. We expose ourselves to various environments and kinds of association, and we can notice the result afterwards. Anyad evahur sambhavad, anyad ahur sambhavat. And so, the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the prime texts of the teachings of Bhakti Yoga, which is ever satisfying. It doesn't matter if you've read it 50, 100, or 1,000 times. You'll still find the subject matter fresh and interesting. It's called transcendental literature. That's what transcendental literature is. You don't get tired of it. It gives new insight every time you read it, and you feel as if what you're reading is in resonance with the voice within your heart, which, by the way, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is God, who resides, or Krishna, within everyone's heart, and is giving intelligence. And he also speaks externally through the Bhagavad Gita. A very helpful aspect of the Bhagavad Gita is talking about the modalities of the world, and importantly, there's a modality that one can practice to attain and achieve, and that's called sattva, goodness. And the Bhagavad Gita, in the 7th chapter, 28th verse, Krishna says, Yesham tvantakatam papam jananam punyakarmanam te dvandva mohanir mukta bhajanti mam dṛḍha-vratāḥ. What's in it for us in this verse? A way to organize our lives, or more importantly, a reason to organize our lives for coming to a purified state of consciousness. And not just consciousness, also there's a body-mind connection, which has been much studied and written about, spoken about, and as people are more aware of nowadays. So in the verse, Krishna says, Yesham tvantakatam papam jananam punyakarmanam. He's talking about a state of consciousness in which we're not forced to perform activities that are detrimental to our well-being. We may become familiar with, or we may be already familiar, that is, with such behaviors like addiction. We may become addicted to activities, substances that are noticeably bad for us. However, we may also not have the wherewithal, the strength to not do them. And this is a state of being conditioned, says Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. The more we're conditioned by the modalities of nature, which are 3 in number. One is sattva, or goodness. It's the pure state, or the state which is the purest in this world, that gives us the most freedom. Below that is rajas. And rajas is a mode in which we feel attached, inordinately attached to those things that are not in our ultimate best interest. And then there's tamas, which is just the stupid zone, where people say, what were you thinking? I wasn't thinking. Because there's no impetus for doing the right thing. It's simply darkness, and therefore one does things that are obviously wrong to most people, but one thinks that they're doing the right thing, even though it's harmful to oneself and to others. In general, these are 3 gradations mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. So in this verse from Bhagavad Gita 7:28, too bad Ramani isn't here, because she'd be watching the temperature in this room and making sure that it's not too hot. She's already in Delhi. She's here? She's in Mumbai. Well, maybe she should have an app on her phone where she can run it from there, which I'm sure one of you could arrange. In the verse, Yesham tvantakatam papam. Papam sometimes is translated as sin. There's a way in which there's an order in the universe and in the world, just as there is here in, where are we, Santa Clara County? Got it right once. We're in Santa Clara County. There's certain rules of the road. The other day I got pulled over because I had 2 earbuds in while I was driving. And he said, no, 1 only. So that's a rule. I now know because I got a warning. And there are many such rules. And similarly in the universe, there are rules. And if one violates those, there are consequences. And there are ways in which when we exploit the world for our own purposes, which is pretty much constantly because it's the rule of the world that we are compelled to try to survive at every moment. And therefore, the ancient literatures say, well, just by walking around, breathing, eating, preparing food, and gardening, you're killing millions of other creatures. And why? So you can stay alive. What to speak of if you perform activities that are violent towards others or deprive them of their property and so forth. These you can get pulled over for. And it's not just if they catch you or not. There is a sense in the Bhagavad Gita of a universal intelligence called Paramatma, who records everything dispassionately and just, okay, all right. And there's a long list. And when that adds up, you have to pay back for those things that you've taken beyond your quota, for the ways that you've interacted with others that are inappropriate or violent, and so forth. That's called papam. And in the verse, Krishna says, Yesham twantakatam papam jananam punyakarmanam. That the people who are more free in their lives and who therefore have the luxury of clear thinking and who can see what's right and what's wrong and therefore avoid more and more trouble, they're more likely to take to an advanced spiritual practice. Krishna says this. So there is a way in which, in the practice of bhakti yoga, there's an encouragement that one practice the tenets of bhakti, while at the same time one keeps a clear mind by cultivating what is called sattva, or goodness, the various habits. And to begin that, there are various habits that are categorically not helpful. One of them is intoxication. The way in which, well, let's just say that there's a rule here in Santa Clara County that if you're intoxicated and you drive your motor vehicle and you're found out to have done so, then you get what's called, there's the 3 letters for it. You know what it is? Everyone knows DUI, right? If somebody has a DUI next to their name somewhere, people think you're irresponsible. You could have killed somebody. And that's punishable because you were intoxicated. And if you have an accountant and you call up on April 16th to see how your taxes are going, or let's just say April, May, you haven't heard from him or her for a while, and you say, on May 15th, did you finish my tax? Oh, sorry. I've been intoxicated for the last month, so I didn't really get a chance to look at it. You'll probably move your account somewhere else, right? Say yes. Yes. Yeah. Because, as was proved on a famous episode of Oprah Winfrey about 30 years ago, the more people drink alcohol, the stupider they get. And that was done in a controlled environment in which people who had never or were not accustomed to drinking alcohol took measured amounts according to their body weight and then were videotaped to watch later to see what they looked like themselves. And they were wholly embarrassed. Not H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-Y. So it's a natural tendency to intoxicate. As is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Loke vyavamisha, madhya seva. Madhya means intoxication. That's it's naturally attractive, even ants. Once Srila Prabhupada said, if an ant gets information that there's a grain of sugar on the top of a skyscraper building, he'll make an arrangement to go there. Because for an ant, a grain of sugar is a kind of largesse when it comes to intoxication. And then there's unrestricted sexual activity, which leads to very, very intense attachment. And attachment, as I may have alluded to earlier, is ruled by rajas, or passion, the passionate mode. And there's a way in which the more attached we are to our physical body and to the gratification of our body, the less clarity of thought we have. In fact, you can make a graph and it looks like this. So there's an inverse relationship between material attachment and reason. And that's why sages keep themselves free from attachment so that they can be of service to others by being clear-minded. And therefore, as a entry level to spiritual practice, it's highly recommended that one's careful about the way one attaches oneself in this world. The ways in which we become attached to our counterparts, male, female, etc., can lead to extremely deep-rooted attachment by which we do not have reasoning power, and it makes it very difficult to be steady in spiritual practice. Therefore, there's a universal, I looked it up, there's only a few places on the earth planet that don't have some kind of marriage ceremony. Very, very rare. Almost every civilization has it. With a recognition, because I've been to a lot of weddings, and I've noticed that they pretty much emphasize or overemphasize, I guess you can't overemphasize, how important the ceremony is, and how this is for life, and how it's through thick and thin, for goodness. What is sickness or in health? What else? Rich or poor. These are, et cetera, and how important it is to be careful and regulated and not become wantonly exposed to all kinds of relationships and therefore become unnecessarily attached. Did we turn the heat down? Okay. Maybe it's just, okay. Air is also nice if we get air too. I know where there's some cool air. It's right outside. Well, let's vote. It's a democracy here. Okay, let me just take 1, 2. I only have 3 votes. I'm voting for it. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm going to campaign. That's a good idea. We'll try putting on low and just see if it circulates the air a little bit. And I'll stop in just a minute. There's also a couple other ways in which one can stymie one's clear consciousness. Another is because of diet. Diet is important. Therefore, in Bhakti Yoga, the sages recommend, and the ancient teachings recommend, that one eat a pure diet. What is pure diet? It means food that you've offered first to God, and therefore it's highly recommended that one offer food that comes from as nonviolent sources as possible. And then finally, there's gambling. And there's a way in which the trying to get something for nothing mentality is contrary to an understanding of the way the world works, is that we never get something for nothing. And Bhagavad Gita recommends that even if you're in an occupation that doesn't pay as much as somebody else, or is not considered socially as good as somebody else's, et cetera, he said, if you have it because it came to you naturally and it suits your nature, don't become too concerned, because however you adjust your situation in this life, there's always going to be some fault. Just as fire has smoke, which is a faulty aspect of fire. He said, similarly, any kind of work that we do in this world has some sort of fault. So don't try to get ahead artificially. Those who get addicted to gambling also lose their reason and sometimes jeopardize their lives, find themselves in debt to others. Though there are some basic principles through which one can avoid becoming more entangled, and simultaneously, and more importantly, they give us an opportunity to practice the tenets of bhakti, which I'll describe briefly in just a moment, unabatedly. And of course, everybody knows most of these things. Even junior high school students know. And I remember When I went to Fairview Junior High School, we didn't call it middle school, we called it junior high school. It was 7th and 8th grade. I don't know about y'all, but that's what we had back then. And at Fairview, there was a fellow student of mine named Steve Rau. I don't know if he's still on the planet or not. But I remember when Steve Rau decided that he was going to get straight A's and he was going to be the valedictorian and he was also going to be the top athlete in school. And I remember he made that decision. And Steve Rau did no nonsense. Steve Rau would run to school and run back just to get in his miles. And Steve Rau would not go out and carouse because he was home studying to get straight A's and so forth. And I saw that by his determination, Steve Rau achieved all those things because he decided he was going to do it. And this is called dṛḍha-vratāḥ. And don't get me started with Dave Dibbern, because I've mentioned him before that he was a flutist and he wasn't making as much progress on his flute playing as he wanted to. And one fine summer night, circa 1969, he lived nearby. He was a fellow student in high school. He came running to our house and burst through the front door with his flute, and he had his head shaved, which was taboo in 1969. Nobody but the Hare Kṛṣṇas shaved their heads back then. And he said, "That's it, no more fooling around. I'm going to get good on the flute." Then he slammed the door and ran home. And he became an excellent flute player. This is called dṛḍha-vratāḥ. Remember the Dave Dibbern or Steve Rau principle. And so in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that if you're careful about the way you organize your life and you don't intermingle with people who are not serious, and not serious means they think it's okay to be stupid, making themselves unnecessarily stupid through some of the activities that I mentioned earlier. It's one of the tenets of spiritual practice. Don't dabble in things that will make you stupid or lose your reason or become so attached unnecessarily that you'll lose your reason. And at the same time, if one practices tenets of bhakti, it's compared to lighting dry firewood. And if one tries to practice spiritual life while at the same time contaminating one's consciousness by the lower modes of material nature through ill-advised activities, it's compared to trying to light a fire that has become moistened by the fog, or even worse, by a heavy rainstorm. It may take a lot more fire to start the kindling in that case. So two things go together. Therefore, the sages gave this advice: lead a clean life. And at the same time, practice bhakti. And then this verse comes to life. Yesham tvantakatam papam jananam punyakarmanam te dvandva mohanir mukta bhajanti mam dṛḍha-vratāḥ. You won't make mistakes because you'll be in the mode of goodness. Mistakes set us back so fast and so far. Of course, we learn from mistakes and we do the best we can, but we won't make stupid mistakes. And it also says that we'll have this sense of determination in our heart, and we'll also be eager for spiritual practice, which isn't, that is, spiritual life, appealing to those whose consciousness becomes sullied by the lower modes of material nature. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, if you let yourself go into the lower modes of material nature, you'll think that spiritual practice is ludicrous and for losers. When I lived in Los Angeles, once I was Well, we lived in Los Angeles. I was married back then, and I was walking from my apartment to Mangalartik. And that is around to walk. It was only about 5 minutes, but I wanted to get there a little early, so it was probably 3:45 in the morning. And it was a Sunday morning, so that meant Saturday was the day before that, which means in Los Angeles that people were still driving around. And I was walking down the street with a bead bag in my hand and ready to walk in the pristine environment of the temple for chanting. And I saw a van. It was a Suburban, so there was quite a few of them that fit in there. Merrymakers. You know what merrymakers are? People that drive around and all night long and try to find something in it for themselves. Like people who go out to clubs and they drink and they drive around until 3:45 in the morning. So I just got up and I was going to the temple and they were still up and going the other way. And I just remember I was walking down the street. There weren't many other people walking on the street at 3:45. They slowed way down and were looking at me as they drove by, and I looked at them as they drove. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that when a person's dedicated to the lower modes of material nature, it becomes their occupation, they see a person who's endeavoring for spiritual practice to be a fool. And vice versa, he says. Yanisha sarvabhutanam. That he makes this comparison. A person who's in the lower modes of nature thinks that a person who's trying to free himself or is already free to be wasting time. So it's important to know what's what. And the practice of bhakti yoga starts with hearing, shravanam. When we hear from Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and we also repeat transcendental sound vibration, especially the chanting of sacred mantras, most particularly as recommended in the Brihat Naradiya Purana, the Hare Kṛṣṇa mantra, which we sing pretty frequently here. It purifies the consciousness and helps us to also rise to the higher mode of nature and beyond, which is Turiya. It's beyond just the 3 dimensions. It's the highest dimension, beyond any tinge from the material world. And therein lies happiness. So one can practice organizing one's life to avoid doing things that contaminate the consciousness, if one likes. And one can also practice simultaneously the tenets of bhakti, especially hearing and chanting. And if you do that on a regular daily basis, then you'll feel progress, and nothing succeeds like success. It's important to feel directly that you're making progress and notice that you're feeling enlivened and that you want to do more and that you're becoming more and more self-determining because your consciousness is getting clear. Those things are noticeable. You can see it for yourself. And that's the beginning of real life. Otherwise, we're just mixed in with the course of material nature, which means that we're forced again and again to do things that are not sanguine and that don't help us and ultimately lead to suffering. So now we'll just take a couple of reflections or questions, and then we're going to try chanting. Reflections are simple because all you have to do is remember anything you heard that's stuck in your mind and you can reflect it back. Okay, we have Brajaras Bhavana and dṛḍha-vratāḥ, 2 of my favorite reflectors and question askers.
I like the point you made about reason and attachment, how with more attachment our reason declines. And I've noticed that in my own life, where if I'm struggling to reason about something or decide, it's a lot easier when I take a step back and try to separate myself from it and feel less attached.
Thank you for the testimonial. I've noticed it myself that if there's a tinge of emotion, one emotion could be if somebody writes something that is challenging, and not challenging in the sense that it's a hard mathematical problem or something that they challenge whatever my position is. There can be a tug from the false ego to say, what do you mean, I'm never wrong? Or how dare they? There are a number of ways in which one could feel like that. Have you ever felt like that? In a conversation with somebody who offers free advice? Like, who are they anyway? That impulse, when it enters into the chest, the mind, is the wrong time to answer. One should learn, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, to detach oneself from that wave of emotion, either as it's happening or to wait until it subsides to react. Because in this chart that I mentioned, the inverse relationship was given to me by Braja Bihari Prabhu, whose profession for many years, he just retired from it, was conflict management, conflict counseling and intervention. People who were angry at one another, had severe disagreements. And he always kept these formulas in his pocket because extremely helpful. Those are also mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you. Dṛḍha-vratāḥ.
I'm just wondering, is there a difference between the determination of the Steve Raus of the world and those who are trying to make progress on a spiritual path? In terms of what they're striving for, is there an inherent difference between that determination?
Yes. There is a difference in the outcome, that's for sure. Just as much as if you climb a ladder, it really depends where the ladder is situated. Because if you climb a ladder and you end up at a precipice where you could fall off, that's one destination. Another, you very purposefully align the ladder and you go up and you're able to, for instance, escape a fire or something like that. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions in the 17th chapter that everyone has shraddha. I mentioned that word earlier. A thrust to go in a certain direction, to believe in something. Everybody. Somebody may say, I'm a scientist, I don't believe in anything, or I'm an atheist, I don't believe in anything. It's like, okay, it sounds like you really have a strong belief in that idea, right? And so Krishna says it's quite natural because the nature of the soul, the self, to have this sense of identifying with a cause, a person, and seeing the world in a certain way. The kind of determination Steve Rau had and the kind of determination somebody has for spiritual life comes from life. The fact that we're alive, we have a sense of wanting to do something. But when that sense of wanting to do something is perverted, and we want to do something that is self-destructive, although it's coming from us who are alive and who have volition to do things, it's misguided. But when it's purified, you'll notice the same characteristics, only it's for the highest cause. So just as Steve Rau got up early and ran to school. So similarly, someone may align themselves. In fact, I've seen in the holy city of Vrindavan that on the Kadashi day, 2 times a month, there's a special day where you can take more advantage of your spiritual practice, or there's a favorable circumstance under which to do more devotional service. I just noticed the streets are packed as people are out there with Steve Rau-like enthusiasm, only they're going to a temple to do their chanting. I mean, everybody has some enthusiasm. Ants have a lot of enthusiasm. I've never seen any entity more enthusiastic than an ant, I have to say. They're so determined. But what is their ultimate destination? Well, just look at the Nature Channel. They'll show you. There's a little city down below, and they have lanes. They have lanes. They probably give tickets for wearing 2 things in their ears. And they're so strong and determined. You can flood them. I've even seen ants stepped on, and they're like, nah, no big deal. But all they're doing is building a little hive and raising their young, and then teaching them how to do the same thing and go out and fend for themselves. Therefore, the Hitopadesh says, as an algebraic expression, that there's no difference between humans and animals except for if the humans are realigned towards Dharma, which is using that Steve Rau enthusiasm for purification and for devotion to Krishna. And Krishna says it in the Bhagavad Gita also. It's there in everybody. It's there even in the plants. Tell me that a jasmine plant doesn't want to not just survive, but take over the neighborhood. Because if you just let a climbing jasmine go, it'll climb over your fence, send out runners into the neighbor's yard, find a stop sign, go up there. It'll take over your whole city if you let it. A soul is, as Krishna says, nahi kashit shananamapi jatu tishtya karma krit karyate hyavasha karma sarva prakriti jargunai. I was telling my wife Nirakula this morning that when I was dreaming last night, I was driving somewhere. I was trying to get somewhere. I was thinking, you're asleep, right? Not really. I'm like, we're always going. There's a sense of that. So it has to be aligned properly and purified. And that's what Krishna consciousness is. There's a song that was written by the Everly Brothers, and the lyric was, looking for love in all the wrong places. There's a song by a San Francisco native, Huey Lewis. He said, I need a new drug. He said, one that doesn't have all the side effects of all the other drugs. Everyone wants the same things. They just have to be aligned properly. And in Krishna consciousness, it means to find the pure form of intoxication. Find the pure form of gambling. You want to know what that is? It means that you take a risk and surrender to Krishna. Like, you're going to do that? When I joined the temple, I was a junior in high school, and about 10 of my friends came to the temple. The first Sunday I was there, and they said, you're kidding me, right? You're really going to do this? You're going to throw away your whole life on this? And it's like, yep, I'm gambling on, I'm putting everything on blue here. Spin the wheel and that's it. And that's, if you want the sense of exhilaration you get from gambling on a roulette table, put your whole life on Krishna and just say, okay, yeah, it's all on Krishna now. Let's see how you feel. There's a big difference. When people bet on a football game, it's about 10,000 times more intense experience for them. But it's a kind of an addiction that leads to a spike in cortisol and other kinds of hormones in their minds, so they think they're enjoying, but actually it's a kind of misaligned activity that just leads us to more misery. But if you do the same thing and say, I'm going to surrender more and more to Krishna, you can try it in the moment. Say, I'm going to try giving up my attraction for looking at a screen and instead chant Hare Kṛṣṇa. That's a kind of gamble because you're putting all your energy on one place and saying, I'm betting here that this is the best thing. And you'll feel exhilarated in that kind of gamble itself. Okay, 2 more and then we'll chant. 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. When you are sharing that how Naimisharanya is the center of this universe.
Naimisharanya, yeah.
Yeah. So whatever is done in the center, right, it becomes widely known. It spreads far away. So one devotee was sharing in this same context when explaining this verse. Prabhupada saw that Indians were not accepting Krishna consciousness and then they were trying to imitate the ways, Western ways. Then he saw how these big cities like New York are the central places for this. So he came and attacked these places to spread Krishna consciousness. I just wanted to share.
Yeah, because Krishna consciousness is not limited to any geographical location. And those who are expert in utilizing everything for Krishna see that wherever it's most favorably accepted is a good place to go. And more than that, Prabhupada saw at the time that English was the medium that was most popular at that time in the world, and America was an up-and-coming superstar in the world of nations. And he then also saw that New York, out of all those places, the financial center, artistic center, and so forth, would be most impactful place to establish Krishna consciousness. That became the center. That's why we call these, we call our temples centers often. You're going to the center. And if you look at old architecture, you go to Europe or Canada, for instance, in Montreal, there's the Cathedral of Notre Dame. It's an impressive building. If you go inside, you'll immediately feel the fear of God in your heart. I know I did. I walked in and was like, I'm sorry. And before elevators, which was really the catalyst for tall buildings, before we had flexible steel cable and we were able to build multiple floors and not have to walk upstairs to get to them, be able to make elevators that would go up multiple floors. The tallest building in every town was either a church or a temple or a mosque or synagogue. And you could see it from all directions. Even now in Jagannath Puri, even though so many hotels everywhere, still from a distance what you see is the Jagannath Mandir. And now in Mayapur, if you've seen the TOVP, everywhere you look from, the flags flying in the top, that's purposeful because that should be the center. And the whole point of Krishna consciousness is to make Krishna the center. And Krishna says, Manmana bhavamatto bhakto. You got to center your mind somewhere, so center it on me. And that's pretty simple. One place, no decisions, just take that. And your life will be perfect because Krishna is the source of everything. Last one. Unless you wanted to make a point too, and then, okay.
I just want to, I had a question. I was just thinking that, sometimes we are just, I was just thinking about myself, rat race on finishing this service, this service, this service, this service. At the end of the day, I sometimes forget I'm actually doing the service for Krishna. So how to get always things back to connecting with Krishna? The consciousness of when you're doing the service, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, such a good question. The best way is to chant Hare Kṛṣṇa. And Prabhupada mentions this very clearly in the verse, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mama nusmara yudyacha mayarpita mano buddhira mami vaishyasya samshayaha, which is a verse where Krishna is making a conclusion, and he's saying if you want to have success in thinking of me, especially when you leave your body, he says, therefore you should practice during this life. And he said you should do it while you work, while you're doing things. In fact, he's telling Arjuna, you remember me and fight. And then Prabhupada, in his purport, said, what this means is you should work and chant Hare Kṛṣṇa. And I notice it going out to, for instance, distribute transcendental literature. In big cities, especially where there's a lot of noise and distraction, it's easy enough to get distracted. Your mind can go in any direction. And also, when talking to people, you can forget that they're not their bodies, or I'm not my body. But if you chant Hare Kṛṣṇa like this, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, there's a way in which, by the power of that vibration, you automatically remember, oh, I'm not my body, they're not my body, and all the other distractions are subdued. And anything we do in our life, or anywhere we go in the environment we're in, if we go on chanting, then we'll be lifted above that sense of so many choices and why am I doing this? You'll remember why you're doing it. Only problem with that system is that it seems too simple. And Prabhupada mentioned this. He said if you tell people to press their nose or to go to Himalaya and sit in a cave, they'll think, well, that must be something. I'm not going to do it, but that's something. But he said if you just say, just chant Hare Kṛṣṇa and work or do your service, it's like, oh, well, that can't work. Well, just try it. And I've noticed myself when I'm in anxiety, which is pretty much constantly, when I start chanting, then the anxiety then turns into something else. I realize, oh, Krishna's here. He's here with me. He's here helping me. What's more, the way the Bhagavatam speaks about chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa or any direct activity of devotional service was that Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janaya Yashuvairagyam Jnanam Chayara Haitukam. There's a concomitant influx of knowledge and detachment that you get from chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa. You can't get that at Whole Foods, nor can you get it from ChatGPT unless you ask the right question. And so it comes from us, from the soul to Krishna. And it's really the only thing that works. That's one of the admonitions, Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam. Nothing else works. And he's like, this, and not that, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else. So we might as well try it, right? Say yes. Yes. All right. Well, let's chant a little bit. The way this works is we'll provide the musical background for you up here. We volunteer. And then I'll do a kind of call and response where I'll sing various mantras and then you can repeat. But it'll be 95% the Maha Mantra. And now we've come to the most compelling part of our program besides Prasadam, which is the Hare Krishna dance party. I haven't written it yet, but it's a book coming out soon called Never Miss a Chance to Dance. And we can practice for that, the tenets of that book right now, because human life really is a celebration. I was thinking about this morning because I was listening to a set of verses, and one of them talks about how rare the human form of life is, and that if you've gotten one, you're really lucky. And I was thinking of my body as a robot, and I was thinking, what a good robot. I saying, good robot, very nice. Because I was sick for a few days, and then it just got better and did it on its own. Well, I mean, thanks, Mom. I didn't do anything. I was like, good robot. And if you've got the best kind of robot, labvamsa durlabhamidam bahusambhavante, the Srimad Bhagavatam said, you're really lucky. Just use it for the highest purpose, which is to get this ahaitukya pratiyata, unmotivated, uninterrupted service to Krishna. You can do that by chanting Hare Krishna and serving, and then your life will be sublime. And so that's cause for celebration and dance. So leave it all on the dance floor tonight. And what we're going to do is put away our asanas, roll up this carpet, and since so many of us, men can be on that side, women can be on this side, and then we'll leave a row down the middle so that there's just a little breathing room. And we'll have a harmonium player in the middle too, so try not to stand directly in front of her so she can't see the deities. And we'll dance the night away. How's that sound? Okay, we'll see you on the flip side in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Hare Krishna.